Welcome once more to Artistry Podcast. I am Jay.
And I'm Sev. Today we'll continue to explore storytelling and base our discussion around the nature of conflict and the notion of good versus evil. As usual, you'll find detailed information in the description.
That being said, we are trying something new. We have a guest. Our guest is also a Portuguese writer writing a book in English. Welcome, Elai.
Hello everyone, it's nice to be here. I'm glad you guys invited me.
We thought it would be interesting to discuss the character's essence. What defines good and evil? Is there such a thing as objective good and objective evil? Are protagonists and antagonists in a story merely of opposite viewpoints, or are they good and evil? In this context of good and evil, let us know in the comments what character you find particularly interesting and why. We thought this would be a good discussion for two writers. I'd like to start by posing a question and answer it myself first. Can we define good and evil universally and objectively? My opinion and the short answer is no. And the reason for that is, I think it depends a lot on people's culture and upbringing and the situation. You can find this very commonly in simple examples such as a tribe that is trying to survive. Generally, well, you can disagree with me, but generally it is frowned upon to have people have children within the same family. But there are times, in times of kings, they have to preserve the bloodline, or you have times where a tribe is dying out and there is no other choice. So the context changes, and so what is maybe considered evil is not so evil anymore. Another thing that I think a lot of people would agree is, generally speaking, mutilation is frowned upon. It's not good. It is evil.
Frowned upon.
But then you can maybe you can see where I'm going here, but you can see the case of circumcision. I mean, I think it's not very good, but there are cultural reasons as to why it happens. So I think most of the things are actually very relative, depending on the situation, the context, and the culture. And so my opinion is that characters in any story, good and evil, is just merely opposite ends of a story. They're just different viewpoints. And I think some stories tell this very well, others not so much. Disney generally, like Disney movies and stuff, they try to be like, oh, this is good, this is evil, and it's objective. I think that's the feeling they that gets across. And I think those stories lose a little bit of richness because of it. They take the humanity away from the character that is quote unquote evil. I think it's much more interesting than that. So how do you see it, Elai? And then Sev?
Well, you talked about actions, and some actions are very hard to define as good or evil, depending on a lot of things, as culture, as you said. But when you analyze morality, the morality behind, the reason behind why someone is doing something, I think, I'm not saying you can define good and evil, but it's easier to pinpoint, to create an area of good and an area of evil that most humans will agree on. Like most humans respect their moms across not all cultures, but most cultures. It comes naturally to us. I think things that come naturally to us can be more easily agreed on being good or evil. With that being said, in a character, you'd expect to define him. I'm sorry.
I mean, what you were saying is kind of like you have characters that are good comes naturally, evil is fabricated. That was sort of the conclusion you were coming to, I believe. It's like everyone wants to be good, and evil comes out of necessity. And that is no.
Not necessarily. I mean, you can have like a character. Imagine Umbridge from Harry Potter. You can have a character that it believes to be right, believes to be doing the right thing, but to everyone's eyes, it's so clearly that it comes from a place of harmfulness.
And that comes a bit from how what Jay was saying, that it depends on perspective. That she was taught that way, that the discipline and rigorous and punishment comes as a result to better oneself, so she sees that as the right path, and therefore that is seen as the good path. Like a lot of righteousness and good are often synonymous, and Umbridge is a good example that that shows that righteousness does not equate to being good. But it is what she perceives. She's actually one of the best characters in Harry Potter, I believe. One of the few that actually, has more to her than just being a conduit to serve Harry Potter. But I have another opinion, which is, I do think there's such a thing as good versus evil, universal good versus universal evil. And an example of that is on Dungeons and Dragons, where good is often perceived as you doing something selfless, and evil as doing something selfish. Basically, evil is the culture of the I, while the good is the culture of the community. And if you are altruistic and give to the community, you're always perceived as good universally. If you sacrifice to others, I think that is a universal good, no matter the situation. And the same thing is given the opposite. If you backstab, even for good reasons, kind of like stealing a loaf of bread to feed yourself out of desperation, that is still seen as evil, mainly because it is a selfish endeavor. However, I would like to say that that is as far as I believe in universal good versus universal evil, is selfish versus altruistic, because there comes a lot of comments that are more interesting. Like Jay was talking about the mutilation aspect and circumcision, where that is seen as, especially if you're doing it to a child who doesn't consent or give an opinion, that to me in current society seems evil. But in 20, 40, 60 years ago, that was seen as completely normal. In fact, if you didn't do that, it was seen as you being creating a pariah, an outcast, or simply it was for people justified as hygienic
and
reasons.
Being evil by doing so.
Yeah. So, yeah, good, the opinion of good does evolve. Like 100 years ago, what was considered racist does not equate to what today is considered racist. And 100 years ago, people are like, oh, I'm good. I only had one slave. I don't know what the problem is. And yeah, it does evolve.
Well, there's a lot of points I want to touch there. Let me just go back to Umbridge. You're right, she's a very well-rounded character. And she does have this feeling of righteousness that makes us feel so the injustice of it. She doesn't deserve to feel that way. And I think that's part of what makes us scary and what makes us root against her and at the same time admire her. But what I was getting to is she might have been brought up that way, and she might believe she's right. But there's certain things she does, like the thing with the pen when he writes, I won't tell lies, something like that, and it cuts in his hand. She takes a pleasure out of that pain, and that in itself, most of us would agree it's evil. She's taking pleasure out of the lesson she's teaching. She could be a character. She could be a character that believes it's right and it's that strict and uses that technique, but it feels inside the empathy for the learning curve that the character is taking in front of her eyes. But what appears to us as the audience, as the readers, is that she's taking pleasure of it, and that's what makes her evil. In
that is in my opinion, the worst part, is that they needed to underline how evil she is by taking pleasure. Like, she's not punishing you because you're growing or because you did something wrong. She's punishing you because she kind of likes the power trip. And for example, I actually, like, when I was growing up, I had a rebellious phase, but I was slightly unorganized, and I did whatever I wanted. Like, I never set a car on fire or anything like that, but I had a very loose upbringing in my home. And I was confronted in my early teens with a bit more structure, saying, you can't do this, you can't do that, you should do this. And at the first, I thought I was, oh, dude, you're such a square. I'm obviously, I'm not hurting anyone. My justification was always, I'm just being lazy for my own sake. Like, I'm the only one who's hurting. Who's coming out hurt in this, so what's the problem? But the dude basically who kept on pushing me was just trying to teach me discipline and just saying, you're being lazy, you gotta stop doing that, you gotta look
but
for
probably
work, you
came
gotta
from
do
a
your
place
job
of
first.
love.
And it was the tough love approach. It's like, you gotta stop being a little piece of shit basically and learn to be productive. And at first I was incredibly resentful of that. Like, I always felt like someone was headed out for me. Like, dude, I'm just doing my own thing. But by 10 years later, I start to realize how much that those teachings I extrapolated, I grew from them, and how much I see other people who desperately needed the same slap on the wrist and the same pull and the same tough love of saying, dude, your laziness is not, oh, cute. Oh, he's tired. Just let him sleep another hour. No, dude, motherfucker, get out of bed, do your shit, do your chores, and then you can rest. And, you know, I can relate to sometimes when someone seems like they're being strict, evil assholes, they have good intentions in heart. And that's when good antagonists are developed. When what they do really stood out as you just didn't understand it at the time. And I'm struggling to find a character that is like that.
But for that to happen, you have to believe that the character might be doing it out of something that it's not pleasure in others.
Usually it's like jealousy, or maybe just think that they are out of touch with how the world is. That is what my justification was. Dude, this guy he was brought up in the 40s. He grew up in a military headquarters, and his mom was a general or whatever. Dude, chill out, peace, things evolved, and you get lax.
But see, that's an example where the character can become evil or do evil things out of selflessness. Like you said before, that selfless acts in Dungeons and Dragons are considered good. Evil. Selfless.
Selfless, yeah, sure. Yeah.
But take a character like Thanos. In his mind, he's helping everyone. He's doing the right thing and he's helping everyone, not himself. He suffers when he loses his daughter. But he does it for others, and he's still doing evil. He's still making something evil. You can't be wrong in that the way you perceive the world, like you're just saying. You can be trapped in your own world, believing your own rules, doing good as you believe you're doing, and overlook all the evil you're doing on your way.
The ends justify the means conversation.
Yeah, and in the end game, they even explore that from the planet's point of view, where pollution goes down and whales return, something like that, and show, see, there's good in what he did. Yeah, but half the people of this planet died.
The world does seem so incredibly complex that there is no easy string that says, oh, this action is evil, this action is good, or this is an evil action that justifies a good ending. However, on the Thanos example, it is the way they characterize him as evil is that he tortured his daughter, he's ruthless, he steps on everyone on his path, he does whatever it takes to reach his end goal. And his end goal also sets up a conversation of, is that the best end goal? Like, should he destroy half the population, or just to create the universe doubly as big? I mean, he had the power of a god by the end of it, so why not just change the rules and make it so that the universe is twice as big, and therefore that would be the good solution. Now,
you're saying that there might be kind of a revenge, like a punishment to human, not just humanity in this case.
No, I think I think it's a pride thing, which again is a selfish thing, because when he was a titan in his planet, Thanos, the character supposedly started this whole conquest because he kept warning his people that they were running out of resources. The planet they were on could not sustain the growth of his population, and so he said, "Dudes, we gotta cut ourselves down in half."
It's like the accountant. It's like the accountant for the planet. Everyone's having fun. People, we can't spend this much.
Yeah, we got to tighten the belt.
There's an end to the resources we have. Yeah, that's a good point. I never saw that point.
And once, his measures even back then were kind of ridiculous. Like, you just have to kill half of civilization and we'll survive.
And very
technically, he's right, but there is. If that's the only solution, then he was proven right. Like, the population kept growing, the planet collapsed on itself, and he's one of the few titans that are left. So he senses himself, he feels justified in his actions because he was right in his opinion. But that does not mean that his motivation is objective, or his even personality comes from good. I think it comes from ego, from pride, from
And that's
wanting to
that
correct
character
something.
is a very good example of polarization, because people could address the issue very quickly. What if there were just half of us, and it's very easily for us to get stuck in traffic and overlook the death of half the planet to just
Just
come
numbers.
to terms with, there should be half of the people right now. Or when you see something on TV, there's an aisle of garbage in the middle of the ocean, and you'll be like, yeah, humanity doesn't deserve to
We don't even need to be so
have
drastic.
8 billion people on this planet. But you're overlooking the death of 4 billion people when you say that. You're not really.
We don't need to be
taking in
that
account.
extreme. Like we have a real life version of this. The COVID pandemic. Like just last year, when when it was at its height and everyone was quarantining and pollution, we saw on the news like pollution going down, dolphins returning to river banks, and everyone was saying, "Oh, the world is finally healing just because we stayed at home for a month." Imagine the weight that if we could just continue. This is a sign that we need to moderate. There is an answer beyond. You know what? Maybe we should just kill half of us.
Maybe when Thanos used the glove, that's what happened. COVID.
It took 1 year later, but you're not wrong.
Yeah, it's a very slow version of it, but you're right. You're right.
So a little bit within that line of thought. So what functions do you think that characters serve in a story, like protagonists and antagonists? Can they exist in a story by themselves without the other, without their polar opposite? And would that make a good story if they do? What do you think?
Well, there are examples of characters that carry on a story with the viewers just playing, the audience just playing with their moral compass. A good example of that is, I don't know if you know BoJack Horseman.
Yeah.
It follows a
Nice
character
cartoon.
that is bad in his actions, but it appears to be good or willing to change his actions because of the burden he feels, because of the pain he causes on others. And you're taken on a journey, and you're rooting for him to be good. You're rooting for him to address those issues and make that effort, and you're always believing in him, but he keeps failing you. And it's interesting to see how you feel throughout the seasons towards that character, when you really love him and he commits and he does something wrong, and you feel the pain he's feeling for doing something wrong, and everyone's against him, and you're like, oh, my poor BoJack, I know how you're feeling, but you shouldn't have done that. And later on, most of us, I think, will be like, you piece of shit, you've done it again. And by the end, many of us will be like, I hope you die. And it does have an antagonist, but it's curious in this particular case, and this happens a lot. It's a very happy character. It's a character that doesn't do any wrong to anyone, and it's portrayed.
The perfect person.
It's portrayed as annoying to BoJack's eyes, but that comes a bit from the jealousy that he has of that healthiness, of being a healthy character that gets along with everyone, and it's loved and loves back. But you see that annoyance because you can relate to that too. Oh, look at that guy! Everyone likes that guy. But you're kind of rooting for him to be good.
It's very hard to nail the balance between a self-deprecating antagonist, like it's not even self-deprecating antagonist, self-deprecating protagonist, because BoJack is the protagonist of his story, and that is very. It can be very frustrating for the audience to have a protagonist that acts so far in his self-interest that he does stupid shit that you just do not agree with.
Yeah, it creates doubt in yourself. At what point can I still forgive?
Yeah, and it kind of makes you like, oh, dude, this is... You stop questioning the actions of the character, and you start questioning the actions of the writer. Because you start, at that point, you're like...
That's not fair. That's not fair at all.
But it's what happens. Is you start, dude, this character is acting in a way to drive the plot, and people start thinking that. It's like people, like, you don't, normal person, you had everything to be happy at this point, and you threw it all away. And the writer justifies, oh yes, it's because the character was afraid to be happy, and therefore he threw it all away. But in reality, a guy just thinks you just wanted to make another season out of this shit. when you break that contract of a character being so self-destructive that it prolongs his suffering, that's when you start, fuck, I'm tired of this show. I remember watching one.
I didn't feel that at all. I went slowly from loving him and understanding him, but I started seeing it when I was feeling like a piece of shit myself, and maybe that's the right place to be when you start watching the show.
Sure, and then you start to relate. But I would still say that BoJack is a good example of a show that does it well. Because when I was starting this rant, I was talking about a show that came out on HBO, The Flight Attendant. And I tried watching that show, and the protagonist is kind of this neurotic.
You feel like he's doing like the writer. Now I understand. You feel like the writer's doing on purpose to artificially get that feeling that
create problems to solve. Like the character, every single time the character could do something wrong, she did. And there is a point in a story that if you want to make the character sympathetic, you make them do a mistake. Making a mistake is human. But when all she does are mistakes, immediately that balance just goes way off. And there is a difference between a character making a mistake and a character being incompetent. And that is the line you have to toe. When a character is self-deprecating and self-destructive and generally just a person that kind of is just this bastion of chaos, you need to be careful in how you portray that, because very quickly he or she stops being the protagonist and just becomes the annoying antagonist to the story. Like that person is a problem.
It's very interesting to me that they would try that artificially, like as a formula, because when it happens naturally, it already has its own challenges to overcome to become popular. When you try it as a device, it's very weird to me that the writer would go for that device and not an easier one.
It's not that weird. It's because you don't want your character to change.
If you're doing a formula, you should try that.
Also that, but also because you don't want your character to change. Because if your character changes, he stops being interesting. Like another example is House. House is a broken, angry, polarizing character. But because he's always right, and he's perceived as being a genius because of his attitude, I'm talking about Dr. House, the series. Like because he's always perceived as being right, like his methods justify his means justify his ends. And so during the show, he says that, oh, I'm an asshole because I'm in pain. I'm in constant pain. I'm in pain and I'm unloved and I resent and I hate. But throughout the whole series, they give him multiple opportunities to heal. But the writer always goes back and says, his healing worked only about 2 episodes, then he went back to shit. And the reason they do that is because they don't want the character to change. They just want to keep going through more episodes and just do more.
You can make a parallel of that with Rick from Rick and Morty. You excuse him for anything because he's the smarter man on Earth. So the gimmick there is, I feel lonely, I'm so smart, this is such a small universe for me, so nothing matters, and if nothing matters, I can do anything. And at a point you never see him as a hero, but you just excuse him and say, yeah, do your thing.
On Rick and Morty,
you admire him at some point.
Yeah, on Rick and Morty, and even on House to some extent, because those shows are formulaic. Like, if this episode starts and ends in 30 minutes or 40 minutes, you kind of understand that there is no real arc. But on a movie, a character needs to evolve. So when in a movie, the character is just constantly... Actually, I don't even agree with that as well. I'm just going through the thoughts as I'm telling them. Like, maybe through a series, a character needs to evolve. And I do think Rick evolves. House doesn't, though.
Well, Rick evolves at a family level, but very slowly, and is not really supposed to, because the creator... This is another discussion, I'm sorry. You're talking about the character changing in a movie, but imagine a movie or a series, imagine BoJack. Would you really be happy if, at the end, would you really be satisfied if the character made that transition, or do you really
sure.
need?
In fact, I would hope that there's only 2 endings. One, he dies, therefore his
That was my aim too. I hoped at some point that it finished like that. But not because I hated him, but because I wanted to see it. If you're going that low, I want to see you go as low as you can get.
I think there's obviously those two endings for everything: the bittersweet ending and the happy ending. The bittersweet is, well, he evolved, he changed, but it was just too late, and now his ending is the sad one where we mourn for him. Or you actually see him change, and he actually became better. And he adjusted his life, and it's never too late to become better.
But it's really hard to make that change believable and relatable.
If you're doing it through a series, I don't believe it. I mean, it's hard as hard as it is writing a character. But ultimately, you have to be proficient enough in telling a story to always evolve with the writing, or evolve the character with the writing. It's like, actually, the character does have a chance here to improve, and from the past experiences he does have the proper motivation to improve, so he's a little bit better now, and the next situation he's a little bit better. A show that does this well I watched recently is The Good Place, where in the first episode the main character is The Good Place is a character that went to heaven, is a bad character that went to heaven accidentally. And she, in the first season, tries to trick everyone to make it seem like she belongs in heaven. But afterwards, as the series goes on, she does change slowly into a good person. Now, you can question why she does it, but she does. And you can accompany her evolution. And by the end, because I'm not going to spoil it, but by the end, you're happy with the resolution, be it bittersweet or not. And I think there is you can do that with basically any story. As a story has an ending, you can make it a sad ending, like, and then the meteor crashed down and everyone died. Or you can make it a happy ending and say, and finally evil was vanquished and they will live happily ever after. Those are always the two endings.
There's a very good example of that with the character Zuko from The Last Airbender. While he's presented to you, it's freaking awesome to everyone, and he's presented to you as this villain that you do hate from the get-go. They make him seem childish, selfish. They make him lose. They make everything they need to make it look like a character you don't want to relate with, and then they take you on the long journey of his redemption, and also of his upbringing, because you learn how he got there, and you see how he resolves it, and by the end you just love the character, and this is perfectly well
the
written.
The lone wolf, the villain with a heart of gold, or all that. By the way, those are my favorite characters, as are anyone.
It's my favorite character from that show.
Yeah, it's villains that have a sympathetic streak, I think, are Mamma Mia. They're the good ones. That's because you can see that they are the product of their upbringing, but at the same time that their beliefs come from their upbringing, from their culture. But it's not necessarily evil. Like, they don't. I hate the evil out of evil's sake. Like, a person just walks in and the first thing he does is step on a baby. Like, what the fuck, dude?
I'm just gonna step on this baby.
Dude, that's
coming in hot. First shot, first 2 seconds. This is your villain. You're never gonna learn.
That's part of my contract. As soon as I enter any room, I need to have a baby in front of me, and I need to step right on that soft skull.
Well, I mean, Martin did something there, because Jamie Lannister, the first interaction you have with him, he attempts to kill a child, and you're like, I'm gonna fucking hate this guy throughout the whole series.
On Game of Thrones.
And then he has his own path to redemption, and I believe it divides the crowd. I don't think everyone will forgive his actions, but a lot of people.
No, man, I think majority of people do forgive it.
Really?
To give context to what you're, and oh my god, you picked up exactly
where
I wanted to go. When I said that thing of a villain stepping on babies, you went exactly to where I wanted to go. So I have two things I want to say. First of all, I'm going to say that the villain that steps on babies kind of annoys me, and that is why on Game of Thrones, the evil king that was Joffrey, that he was evil out of evil's sake because he was a bad seed. He was just this villain of. He was cruel. He was just a cruel individual, which exists in the real world.
It only worked because he was a child. That was the gimmick. Like, what? Because otherwise, I get what you're saying.
And those evil characters exist in the real world. There are truly cruel monsters, but in terms of writing, those are incredibly boring. And I remember watching the show and people going like, "Oh, this Joffrey character, he made an amazing role. He really made it so everyone hated him." Dude, that must have been the easiest role for an actor to make. To act so completely devoid of humanity.
I did like the way he played it. I get what you think, but I did like the way he played it. I'm not saying it was the hardest part, of course.
No. I want to make this very simple, very obvious. I'm not saying that he acted poorly. I'm saying it was an easy job to act. To act uninterested, like you don't have consequences, is easy for an actor because obviously acting, you're pantomiming, you're playing pretend. So basically, he just needed to not care, which actors can do relatively easily because what they're doing isn't real. He's like, usually the hardest aspects of acting is when you try to convince something that is real, like, oh, my mother died, and you have to cry on cue. On Joffrey, what they had to tell him was, your mother died, don't cry, easy, done. Oh my god, what an evil character.
I think that one of the reasons it might might not make for an interesting character, that trait of pure evilness that some people
it's not interesting
have, is that it doesn't challenge your moral compass. It just doesn't challenge what you're feeling at all. You're just
it's just
absolutely right that you're right to hate him. You're not being like when you have a character being vulnerable for a moment.
Exactly.
A villain,
to
and
me,
you feel
Joffrey
like, and I hate this guy. But I'm being
Joffrey as the king is equivalent to me as they crowning a hurricane. He's just a force of nature that just does his whim, and you can't stop him. So to me, it doesn't have that, like you said, that personal motivation, those philosophies that kind of make you wonder. He's just cruelty for cruelty's sake. And again, not saying that's a bad character. I'm just saying that to me, it's not an interesting character.
And it's probably the only character made like that on that series. Everyone else has
you also
like
have you also have the bastard Ramsay, who is like the second Pokemon evolution of Joffrey.
I wonder
Ramsay Bolton.
The final evolution.
Yeah, the final evolution. I think they tried to make it Daenerys, but that I'm going further on my rant about why Game of Thrones failed. But now to make interesting villains, which you picked on very keenly, what I wanted to touch on was Jaime Lannister, a character that is introduced immediately on the first episode as an incestuous, uncaring, cruel, murdering man. The first episode you see him, he had sex with his sister and threw a kid out a window.
Yeah, it's interesting that later on the incest plays in his favor because it makes him an outsider.
Yeah,
and makes you
like he just really cares.
Makes you question why are you judging that part? And that's a very interesting.
He just loves the only person that understands him, and that can be very like he loves the wrong person, and that is a very understandable trait. But his evolution is stark. Like you see him being this cocky asshole, but as the world just keeps pushing his shit in, and I feel like, and I might be wrong, but I feel like the best way to force a character into evolving is to make them suffer. Basically, if you have a polite discussion over a dinner and you go like, you know what, slavery is wrong, and the other guy goes, I never thought of it that way. Well, we both changed for the better. I don't think that makes a very interesting story.
I
However,
think stripping a character from his strengths, it's also very important.
Exactly, but that's the suffering.
Making him vulnerable, teaching him about being
making
humble.
him eat shit, and then at the same time, it's not like he breaks and says that he was wrong. He never says that he was wrong, but he does justify why he is how he is. And that is when the audience immediately sympathizes with him. Immediately.
Well, I couldn't do it immediately because I kept the "it threw a kid out a window" thing in the back of my mind, but I see.
Sure, but I mean, yeah, I wouldn't invite him to my baptism, but I do immediately sympathize with him.
He's not a godfather for sure, but
no, please. But this conversation with Brienne, while he was at his most vulnerable, his hand had been cut off. He was starving. He had been tortured, and he had lost a war. He was far from his family, and he never apologized for anything he did. And he was accused of backstabbing his own king, breaking his oaths. He was the worst human being. But then he went up and saying, yeah, I might be all that shit and more, but I am the lesser of evils. That king wanted to burn down the whole town. Well, I killed one king. You do the math. And that is such a powerful storytelling.
I remember
That
rooting
is-
for him when he had to pretend he was as good with the left hand and scare people off. I was because it was like you had the secret. You shared the secret with him, and you were like, yeah, they are buying it. Yeah, keep going, man.
When
Gonna scare
he
those
was
fucks away.
an amazing swordsman with his right hand. They cut off his right hand. Now he needed to use his left, and he was below average. And suddenly you root for him because you're the underdog now, and that is probably another trick that George R. Martin used. It's incredibly easy to root for the underdog. Each time you have a small guy fighting a big guy, you go, oh, you small guy, you go, you. And all of that culminated into Jaime Lannister. He was the underdog in the story. And it's so incredibly annoying that they threw it all away out of... Like, by the end, when you think that the character is evolving and that he overcame his arc and he was tortured and he saw the evil of his ways and that he would find happiness, he went back to his roots. And that is what I meant by a protagonist needs, or an antagonist needs to evolve, and needs to change, and he needs to be happy or needs to die.
I know you don't not like the circle all that much, but he failed the last step. He returned and it was the same.
And he returned for the... And it was like... You said there's the circle, to give a bit of context to the audience. There is a circle of evolution. You start out this naive character. You follow these steps of a mentor. The mentor dies as you enter the adventure. And during the adventure, you go through hardships and you suffer. And by the end of it, you learn a new lesson as you return home to your natural state. That is the circle of where your character goes... and by the end of the story, he is at the same place, but better. And
so in this
Jaime
case,
Lannister,
Jaime Lannister would finally meet his sister and have the strength to deny her, to deny his own love, or kill her, to make something other than, I'm right back where I started, which is in your arms doing anything you need me to.
Yeah, and that seems like the circle was almost completing, and then he just immediately found a shortcut back.
But Martin
like
denies you of that satisfaction a lot of times. It's a trait on his writing.
I have no idea why anyone would think that would be a good storytelling plot for the series. I have no idea how someone wrote that on paper and the writers looked at it and said, "This is a good ending."
Let's
for
go
Jaime
with this.
Lannister.
What do you think of this? Perfect.
Good. No, it's the best writing ever. I don't understand. They completely destroyed his arc. They completely just also destroyed the arcs of characters that revolved around him. They made it so that his ending meant nothing. Like, you need to have change. A story always needs to have change. If you just return to the status quo, as it felt like it was an attempt to be polarizing, to subvert expectations, and that cannot be, that can never be the sole reason to tell a story, is to give a twist ending. You cannot M. Night Shyamalan your way into storytelling.
I don't want to turn this into a podcast of bashing Game of Thrones, but we're talking about people that thought that the fight, the war you have been expecting for 8 seasons, for years, would be better showed at nighttime, filmed at nighttime, with little or no with editing.
That is a problem with production. It does really feel like the writers, they could have had 3 more seasons, but they're like, oh, fuck this shit, I got a Star Wars job to do, so they kind of rushed everything.
The guy with the sword on flames was my favorite character on that episode, because at least I could see something. Really annoying.
Yeah, it was a very unsatisfying ending, and I felt like it was unsatisfying because they threw everything away for the sake of being shocking. I mean, this isn't new. If you just write Game of Thrones last season on YouTube, you're going to find 35 theses of 1 hour long of people explaining why it was shit. And I'm on that camp. I do feel like they really dropped the ball on that. However, it is to serve to explain that evil, there is such a thing as universal evil and as universal good. For me, I know that Jay disagrees. I know that you're still here, Jay. I can hear you in the background. And but I also believe that the more interesting characters are the ones that depict growth. Now I think this is universal. Like if you can start out evil and end up good, and the same way you can start out good and end out evil, which is the idea that Game of Thrones wanted to do. They wanted to show you evil characters become good and good characters become evil. And if the show had delivered on that, I think it would have been one of the best shows on writing, on television, on one of the best mediums ever created. And it's all about evolution. If you're creating a formula where the character is constantly just this house-esque, grumpy, evil person, and he just keeps doing that and just prolong art inevitably for as long as you want, that will always lose value. So my question is to you is, do you rather... I mean, this is a question which I know the answer. Is do you rather have something last forever, even though you really enjoy it, like a Rick and Morty season 86? Or do you rather have two seasons and have it end immediately?
Of course. And with that show, let me tell you, I love Dan Harmon more than the show. I love the creator from Harmontown, from Community, from Rick and Morty. I really love him as a person. And every time an episode comes out, I'm so nervous watching it. I don't even laugh, even if it's funny. I'm just looking and hoping, please be good. And I can only tell if it's really good or not the next day. I don't even know. And people around me that know that I love the show go like, so have you seen the episode? And I'm like, don't talk to me. Don't talk to me yet. And I see the reactions on the internet because I'm suffering for him. But no, I don't want them to season 87. I want the 10 seasons they have played out, and I want it to be good from start to ending and end with a perfect piece of art that no one can challenge, that will strive throughout the years.
It's a question that is unfair, everyone wants that. But
I don't believe that. There are shows that are very unapologetically made for continuation, and House, you were talking about House, is one of those. And yes, the show could have like fewer 6-7 seasons and be an awesome show, or it could just be a money grabber and people be okay with it because most of people, I feel, they don't even really follow the storyline. They just turn on their TV and there's House. And there's another case, and I can just watch this one, figure out something from the bigger plots.
It's what you're trying to sell. It's the Family Guy Simpson formula, which is every episode is contained. You can watch from beginning to end, and you have to balance that because that shit makes money, and it did make money. I think television evolved since then. There is medium that exists only as a means to, it's like popcorn media. Books that exist within a closed loop, series that, like, it's very rare nowadays to have a show that lasts 24 episodes. Like, media has evolved since then, past that. Like, people that want to binge something infinitely turn out to reality TV. So in terms of creative endeavors, people are starting to understand that it needs to have an ending. Like, besides this obvious sitcoms and even animated shows are having an ending nowadays. I was saying that besides the animations to like Simpsons and Family Guy, to be honest, those are barely seen. Like, when was the last time you watched Simpsons or Family Guy? People were switching to Rick and Morty that has a continuum, who's also only had like 6-7 episodes a season. People are also switching to TV shows, animated TV shows like Harley Quinn, which is an amazing animated show that I recommend anyone to see, which also has like 6 or 7 episodes per season and is also has an overlying arc. It's very rare nowadays to see those popcorn mediums.
And it's interesting when you really enjoy a show that is made, even an animation made like that with the continuum, even more than Rick and Morty, something like Final Space. I don't know if you know anything about. Well, but it's not. You can't just watch one episode and get anything out of it. You have to watch the whole thing continuously. And the first season is just amazing, and you're really scared when they announced a second one is coming. And when the second one did, it was below average. And you're like, oh my god, I wish this had ended in the first season. But now a third season came out and it's better than the first, so it's really confusing for a fan. to judge when a creator should stop working.
I mean, it's incredibly hard to make to plan for a short series. Like if you go in, I only want to create 2 seasons of something, but then during production you realize the budget on the first season is shit. So the first season is basically just a character introduction and a vague plot introduction. So
you get ideas
really
along the way. You get new
season.
ideas you want to explore, and that can't be made in just the 2 seasons you were expecting.
Usually by season 2 is when it starts getting good. By season 3 is the best. And after that, you need to start looking for exits. And it's very hard to balance that. You can't predict that in terms of production. And I'm speaking only in terms of production. It's really hard to just predict, this is going to be 4 seasons. By season 3, you might realize, you know what? I just found a new arc that can last for another 2 seasons. And there's also the reason why it's very hard finding shows that are good, that don't exist. Like, I need to formulate this better. Most good shows are based on books or comic books or whatever. It's very hard to create something native without having without being an adaptation of something.
You have to put a creator that does that can plan for 2 seasons and have it happen that way, even if the audience wants more, even if there's more to talk about, more to explore. It's really committed to the final piece than to the money or recognition.
And that just doesn't exist in show business.
There is a few, but I don't know if you know Gravity Falls.
I know of it. I've never seen it.
Well, it's a beautiful show that kids can watch, but it has this huge following from adults as well. And the creator is a big fan of it's a friend of the creators of Rick and Morty, and they make Easter eggs on both their shows.
Yeah.
And he planned for 2 seasons. The creator planned for 2 seasons. He made 2 seasons. He finished in 2 seasons. Everyone wanted more. It sold a ton of merchandising, and it never came back to life. So that was that.
I respect that so much. You remind me of Bill Watterson, the guy that made Calvin and Hobbes. Have you ever seen those comic books of a little boy and a tiger?
Yeah, I've seen the stripes. Yeah.
Those, by the way, that art in those comic books, Bill Watterson is really, really good. Like, to give a brief explanation, most newspaper comic strips are basically 3 panels. The character's always facing forward, always in the same position. And there's always a conversation between 2 people, and all that changes is basically the dialogue. Like, you don't need to draw new poses, new backgrounds, nothing. It's just a white room, 2 characters talking to each other. Like Garfield is like that.
I love Garfield.
Bill Watterson is an artist. So even if it's just 2 characters talking, like Calvin and the tiger, and he does this a lot, like 2 guys waiting and a bus stop waiting for the bus. He, in every single square, he changes the angle and the perspective. Like, he goes from the background, from looking at behind the characters, to just making a zoom on Calvin's face, to making just a scenery shot where the bus is arriving. And every single square he draws is beautiful. Also, like you said about Gravity Falls, it's a comic book that is mostly for children, but because it has so much philosophical humor to it, it's also really good for adults. And lastly, Bill Watterson is I don't understand how this man exists, because Hobbes is a magical tiger, or people say if it's magical or if it's imagination, but it's basically a teddy bear that Calvin has with him, that when no one is looking becomes a tiger, and who is his best friend. And people say if it's just imagination from Calvin or if it's magic. I believe it's imagination from Calvin. But the thing is, this teddy bear of Hobbes is one of the most iconic teddy bears in the world. And my friend and I wondered, why merchandise doesn't exist of this? The guy would have made $1 billion bajillion dollars.
The tiger alone would sell.
Yeah, just a tiger would make $1 bajillion. Everyone would want that tiger plushie. And he doesn't sell. Like, if it exists, it's because it has been it's not contraband. It was people made it on their own, but it's not sanctioned by the author. The author doesn't want any merchandise to exist. He only wants the comic books to exist and nothing else. He doesn't want to sell the rights to a comic book, to a TV series. He doesn't want to sell the rights to a movie. Nothing.
He wants to keep identity, a specific identity.
And I find that shit. I mean, sure,
a legacy.
I appreciate his integrity and all, but god damn, dude, You could just make a teddy bear and you'd be 5 times richer.
No, thank you. The story is more important. That's integrity.
It's not even a story though. Like Calvin and Hobbes is, like I said, a newspaper comic strip. So each 3 strips is a different story. It's basically just a collective of books. It's more Calvin and Hobbes is more similar to Simpsons than it is to Rick and Morty. But it's just it's like you said, the humor is funny and it's nostalgic, and it can be related to children or adults, and it's incredibly well done artistically, and it was incredibly popular back in the 90s. So I'm just shocked why there wasn't this huge marketing rush for it. And the reason is, or merchandise rush for it, and the reason is because the author didn't want to. And I find that so strange. Like, there was no reason for it. He just didn't want to sell it.
Yeah, most of the shows you enjoy and want merchandising from, and there aren't any, mostly is because there aren't enough people wanting to buy.
Or just they didn't expect it. There's another example of that, like The Mandalorian. I don't know if you or Jay saw it.
I saw the first 2 seasons.
Yeah, the Baby Yoda thing. Like it's a puppet.
I'm sorry, I saw
as
the
soon
first
as it
season.
came, Baby Yoda is a character that they didn't expect would be so universally loved. They didn't have merchandise planned for it. They didn't have T-shirts planned for it. Nothing. They just thought it kind of looks like a puppet, so people will probably think it's corny. As soon as the first episode came out with Baby Yoda, people lost their shits. They almost started rioting.
There was a collective awe from the world.
Yeah, and everyone wanted that sweet merch.
Any alien standing by with their
And Disney just had to rush out the first T-shirts and everything, and it looks like something your uncle would make. Like, they just stamped Baby Yoda's face on a T-shirt. Yeah, sell it. It's good. They were just desperate to catch that initial wave, and I find that quite funny.
We don't have the right color of green. Just use what you have. We have people.
Fuck it. Put it black and white. Just write Yoda on a T-shirt.
just the hand will be enough for people now.
Just a Baby Yoda on a black Baby Yoda on a white T-shirt. Sell it. $400 each.
And the other bot, the orange one, the round one. How is it called?
The orange
from
one?
from Star Wars, from the new series. I haven't seen those.
The BB-8.
Yeah, BB-8, exactly. That was everywhere. That guy was everywhere. He was everything. He was a trash can. He was a lamp. He was a book. It was everything.
But they knew that
was the moon at some point.
But they knew that would be a merchandise opportunity. As soon as the first movie came out, as soon as the first trailer came out, they carried BB-8 everywhere. Like on the press conferences, they even had like a BB-8 robot move around. Oh my god, it moves! It actually works, and people were going batshit crazy for it. They knew what they were doing. That wasn't a character; that was a toy they were selling.
I didn't see the movies, so I wasn't into it. So my immediate reaction was, "Really? You guys are doing this to R2-D2? Are we all doing this to R2-D2?" It's orange everywhere. Never seen that much blue.
R2-D2 is another toy as well. I mean, Star Wars, because it's Disney.
It's a toy maker. It's just a toy maker.
Yeah, Star Wars is... And George Lucas...
I mean now, I don't mean... I'm not implying the whole thing. I mean now, it's a toy maker.
Yeah, sure. And George Lucas, he made most of his fortune selling toys of Star Wars than the actual rights of the movie. Like, he's so rich now because of people who just kept wanting to buy a new Chewbacca plushie or whatever.
But that's the standard. That's what happens with most shows. At least sci-fi animation, the merchandising usually makes a lot more money than...
Oh, for sure.
Than the show.
And again, that's another part of the reason why I'm so shocked that Bill Watterson from Calvin and Hobbes just said, you know what, I'm good.
Yeah, it's enough. I don't want the money. Thank you. No. He's
not a rich man. He wrote for comic strips for a newspaper.
Yeah, that's a
he
special
sold a bunch
kind
of good books.
One that does that.
God damn. No, that guy. He's the definition of good.
Have you guys? I don't know if you guys.
Actually, sorry. I have a question. Is that good or evil? Is that selfless or selfish that he doesn't want to give the rights to the comic book?
Well, it's hard to judge. We don't know why he's doing that exactly. I mean, we can presume, we can guess, but we don't know.
Just from what I gather from what you're saying, I'd say that's selfless. because he's preserving the integrity of the comics and maybe believes that's what's important for the world to have. And he's denying money in return, so that sounds pretty selfless.
I swear to God, Bill Watterson is my goddamn idol.
Well, I'm gonna check him out after this.
He's a basic hermit. He doesn't do interviews, doesn't do anything. He just, as soon as
I love artists like that.
He just disappeared.
I love artists that don't appear.
Okay, but going back onto this open discussion, I think we're getting near to an end, right, Jay?
Yeah, I would just like to go back a little bit on something you kind of called me out on, saying that I don't quite agree. You were saying that it's characters who go from evil to good or good to evil. I wouldn't say that we disagree. It's just I think that there is no such thing as objectively good and evil. I found myself in the last few years what I would consider more morally flexible. Like, for example, I had some perceptions of, with corporate evil, so to speak, right? That companies do things for profits and stuff. And then I started getting interested in how to have a company, how to have a business. And then I think, it's actually what they're doing is not so bad. It makes sense from their point of view. So I saw my moral ideas, which were given to me through my perceptions of the world from what people were saying, and I saw them change and go a little bit more fluid, and I see the point in there. I can relate to it. And is it really evil? I mean, they're doing it if it's from the point of view of selfishness and selflessness, there are comparisons between psychopaths and corporations, how they do things, sure. But you can see there is a good reason for it. Regarding characters, I think that a character is much more interesting if you see both sides of that character, the humanity, the compassion, whatever. One character who is completely just, such as Joffrey Baratheon, I think it's a quite boring character, honestly. I don't think I don't think it's a very interesting character. Yeah, I agree with that completely. I think the actor did a good job. Sure, he portrayed the character well, but I mean, do you care about that character at all in any way? Like, does he anger you? I just don't care about him. I mean, to me, if he didn't exist, it wouldn't change much of the story for me. You could have done the plot points of that story in so many different and much more interesting ways, but he was just a central part of it. And sure, I think Thanos is a much more interesting character. Definitely. You can see the remorse, but he still does it because that's what he believes. And also, I mean, I talked about this on our last podcast, I believe, or was it the first? I'm watching a show called The 100, and I find that there is a very interesting evolution of characters, and something that you did talk about, the two of you today, which is, like perhaps how fast can a character change? And I think you need some gradual progression. And is a movie enough to show that progression? I don't know. There was like I don't know where I heard this, but I can compare it to a smile. If you suddenly put on a smile, it looks very weird. It just puts you off. A natural smile, takes time to develop. It takes a few seconds to evolve. Like, it starts off, just a normal neutral face, and it slowly turns into a smile. And that's a very natural, very pleasing thing to see. I think with characters it's the same thing. If you see a change in their personality, whether it's good or evil or whatever it is that you want to change, if it's gradual and you see different plot points that makes the character change, it's much more natural and believable and interesting than it is just suddenly you flip and suddenly you do something else. I don't think that's a very good character. So yeah, those are my closing thoughts. If you want to finish up with something, both of you, I'll wrap it up.
Well, I'd just like to solidify my answer to your initial question. I stand a little bit in the middle. I don't see it that's black and white. I don't think there are objectively a good and evil in the world, but I do think that there's a way as people perceive good and evil. Forget my closing thoughts.
Let Seb do his first. Yeah, and you can get back to it.
Do I believe in universal good or evil? Yeah, I kind of do, because of that whole spiel about the selflessness versus selfish. But that's as far as I go. Like I give a lot of leeway for evil characters unless they're obviously like baby hitting evil. Like I don't care for those. And everything else in the spectrum, like a character that tortures, but he does so because it's a job and it's as a way to earn a living. Like it's not my fault people want to torture you. I'm just a torturer. I actually I wanted to write a story based on that perspective of a torturer torturing someone because it's his job, and actually growing a relationship with the torturee because it's an intimate sadistic relationship, and by the end I want to have the torturee kind of like surviving the torture and have the torture in this existential mess because of what his life was, and have the torturee kind of like forgive him out of pity. I wanted to make the torturer role this pitiful, weak, small-minded man, this pathetic man that chose this path just because it gave him some sort of living advantages. And I wanted to explore that story, but I never got around to it. And I find that more interesting, like when the villain has this self-awareness that he is doing something out of necessity. We talked briefly about the ends justifying the means, but that is honestly the most important part of any story. We spoke on the first podcast, I think it was on the first podcast, that all the stories that exist in the world have been told. We know that the good guy is going to win 99% of the times, 1% of the times it's the bad guy, and even the plot twists sometimes are predictable. What really matters is the details of the story. It's the journey. And that is with the means. The means is always like what a character does to achieve the end is always infinitely more interesting than just the end product. And that is probably the main takeaway from this protagonist-antagonist story of what makes a good villain, what makes a good protagonist. First of all, now I feel like we've missed the part, which is I hate when protagonists and antagonists mirror each other. The sort of like the only difference between like Flash and his opposing force is like there's Flash and there's Reverse Flash. That is Flash's villain is called Reverse Flash. I'm not making this shit up. And one is dressed in red spandex and the other is dressed in yellow spandex. And one goes really fast and the other one goes really slow. And that shit, I hate that. And you find so many tropes of that and that quality throughout all like literature, comic books, movies. The reverse, like to make an antagonist, he has to be the reverse of the protagonist, and I vomit that shit. An example of it being done well, though, is Batman versus the Joker, which is, I consider, probably one of the best rivalries in comic books, and it's one that doesn't really make much sense in terms of themes. Like, in fact, Joker is the fun one, and Batman is the serious, glum one. And one is chaotic, one is incredibly disciplined, and one isn't predictable, and the other one is predictable in his code of conduct. Like, he always saves the person, and Joker just wants to see the world burn. And one of the best movies ever created, in my opinion, was The Dark Knight, which exemplifies that duality perfectly. And it's always when the characters don't mirror each other, when they mirror things that are beliefs. It's not that I'm fast and you're slow, is that I believe in discipline and you believe in chaos. That duality is more interesting. Is that I believe in the color red and you believe... No, actually, never mind that example. I was going to say I believe in the color red and you believe in the color yellow, but that's going back to the Flash example that I hate.
I think that you Joker and Batman are similar in a few ways, and that makes it interesting. But those ways
are similar in philosophical ways.
Exactly. And that's where you want your character to have that dual within, where he feels like he has something, like Harry Potter has some traits of Voldemort. I know, okay, this is a bad example because it's not morality, or more like I can speak to snakes kind of things, and that follows in the yellow-red category. But yeah. The Joker and the Batman, having your main character consider, am I like this guy? Is there a version of me that could be doing these things? Those are interesting questions for you to have a character to pose to himself.
Sure. Sev, did you finish your thoughts? Then we'll give
I think so.
Elai a chance to finish his. Do you want to?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, I don't believe that there's necessarily a universal good and evil, but there are perceptions that feel common to all humans about feelings, about some feelings and actions that another human is allowed to have and still be redemptional. There's still be the hope for goodness in that human. There's like a limit we all humans establish, and I think that the most interesting characters are those that play with that. Not only the villains, not only the antagonists, but the main characters. I think it's good for us to care for someone, love someone, then watch them fail or watch them do something, sometimes out of character that you feel like you need to judge them for, but you still have that empathy and you want him to strive and do well. And
there are things that you remind me of things. There are things that when you do, there's no coming back. Like, no matter how good an evil character can present himself, if he starts out by raping someone, that immediately he's trash. He's
good
really
5-second villain.
Yeah.
My name is Mr. Rapey.
And then he punches a baby.
And then he punches the baby and flies into the sky. And you're like, I don't like that guy. Oh, really?
But...
And then he joins
like
Joffrey.
This is a dangerous conversation to have, but there is rape is considered brutally evil, obviously. Is there a way
for redemption?
For the redemption after that? I do not think there is.
Like, perhaps
depends
this is
on
a question for another podcast.
Yeah, that's a question for another podcast. But let me just say, sorry, it was what we were talking about before raping.
Jesus.
I think
we'll the best way to finish the podcast.
I think we'll just call it a wrap. Okay. Today we spoke about a lot of characters, the nature of good and evil, and what makes an interesting character. As you can see, we have a lot more to say.
Sorry, Jay, I remembered what I was going to say.
Let's
not
go
about
again.
raping, I promise you.
Go on.
We have much higher standards for our heroes than our villains. So when our hero does something wrong, it immediately makes us feel like he's acting in a way that we don't support. But for a villain, he can.
I don't know if I agree with that.
What?
I don't think if I agree with that. I actually think that the villain is under much more scrutiny than the hero. I only base this on an example that it's very almost cliche. We forgive a hero that kills a bad guy, like a goon. I kind of hate that. Like, if a hero has this mercenary goes up to him, like a thug, a goon, and he just beats the shit out of him until he dies, or just blows him up in a blasé fashion. I feel like people just kind of pass over that. Like, goons are expendable. Like Luke Skywalker just using his lightsaber to cut down stormtroopers. And when that's not addressed, it kind of irks me. But if the other thing goes, like Darth Vader killing a stormtrooper, like, oh, what a monster! He doesn't even care about his own men.
The stormtrooper is on his team, but I was talking about something like a recent animated show that I won't say which one it is to not spoil it for anyone, but where you see this massive villain that kills hundreds and hundreds of people, doesn't give a damn about humanity or anyone, and then you're like, oh, he wasn't able to kill his son. I feel something for him now. And you're like, you're holding a really low standard when you say he's not killing his son, there's something in him that you wouldn't do for your main character or presumably any other character on your story.
I actually think you would do that for the main character. Imagine, using the same example, a hero, the protagonist of the story, kills thousands of perceived bad guys. Imagine a war. Like, the war
doesn't
is
kill
basically
baby
two
bad
sides.
guys.
The protagonist is on the good side, obviously, and the other guys are the evil bad guys, and he kills like 200 of them. But then he finds out that his son is in the middle of that enemy army. He's like, oh, and he's raised his sword, but the helmet falls off, and he's, son, Jajmi, no, what are you doing here? And then he can't kill that last person, and you feel, oh, this guy, he's such a good man. Let's ignore the 200 Jajmins he killed before that.
Yeah, I see that. You admire
all
a lot.
The families that lost their child.
You admire a character that really doesn't kill and suffers from it. The Aang is a good example in The Last Airbender. His main concern is even if I could kill the Fire Lord, I wouldn't do it. That's out of the table. How will I deal with him?
Yeah, but I think we're starting a fourth podcast. But so I think we should reach up the conclusions, Jay, before we keep on speaking forever.
Of course. Well, again, we spoke about a lot of characters, and I hope that the listeners found this interesting. Let us know in the comments what you think, and again, what character did you find interesting for yourself outside of this discussion in general, and why?
We have a lot of topics planned for the future podcast, so be sure to follow and subscribe to stay up to date.
Yeah, we'll continue to release about 1 or so podcasts a month. You can find us on Spotify and YouTube, and these links and more will be in the description. If you would like to see us on another platform besides YouTube and Spotify, let us know. I am Jay.
I'm Sev.
And I'm Elai.
Artistry Podcast.
Signing off.